You've got, gosh, four topics for discussion tonight. And I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, sir. The first item on our agenda for this evening, as I had briefed the council on last week, is City Hall landscaping and lighting plan. Staff is seeking direction on, we have some ideas of how we would like to spruce up the front and the back of the building, but we would like to hear from the council as far as what you think about our ideas, for one, and number two, the timing of doing all of this. Would you like to see an amendment to the CIP and the budget this year? Do you feel it warrants that, or would you like to see this included in next year's items? So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to our Public Works and Buildings and Grounds Director, Mr. Mike Grass.
Thank you. And I guess we'll start with the and grounds portion, and I may refer to Steve and Nate a little bit. We, as part of the flagpole replacement, we removed quite a bit of the plantings that were around the flagpole, and then we also have removed some of the plantings around the patio area in anticipation of doing some lighting improvements there, and I think just in regards for some general maintenance. And historically, what's been planted there has been kind of low maintenance, but it tends to grow kind of wild, and so we're looking for some direction from council. Do you want, and we provided some pictures of and examples of what could be planted as a more manicured, more formal appearance. And so we have several examples there. We also have an example of what could be planted around the flagpole. And I think I will defer to Nathan and Mr. Rulo for any specific questions regarding levels of maintenance and care that would be associated with going to a more formal type plantings and a more seasonal and perennial type planting scheme there.
And what I had discussed with Mike on this one is there are obviously a lot of varying opinions. And Mike had, as you can see from the memo, Mike had indicated that what we have out there now is more of an English garden type, let it grow up and in different levels. And there are a wide variety of opinions on obviously what looks good or what you're trying to present, and none of them right, none of them wrong. I told Mike I would like rigidly square evergreens at each of the corners if it was me. And I actually got that look, council member. What a shock. But there are, our goal here is to remember that it is the council's house, if you will. It's the council's place of business as well as the public's. And before we start anything, we'd like to see if anybody has any real strong opinions one way or the other. That's on the landscaping portion. So we would invite your input.
Just a quick question. Were there not two benches in the circle near the flagpole at this time last year?
And there aren't.
There are now? Oh, they weren't there last week. Okay. Never mind.
One of the things, a formal garden takes a little bit more care than the English, wild look. And are we prepared to have maintenance for a more formal garden? I like the formal look because it's business, and I think it would be better for us. But I just wanted to know if it would create a problem on maintenance.
I'm going to let Mr. Rulo answer that since he's looking at me that way.
Yes, you are correct. It will take a little bit more time. We do actually have a part-time horticulturist on staff. She actually started today. She was here last year. If you all remember, I think you could see the improvement of some of the flower beds around town since we had her on staff. But then again, it's up to you all if you want us to spend a little more time up here on the appearance of the flower beds, then that's what we'll do.
I'm kind of curious if you can define what formal is. I guess I'm hearing different terms, or I'm on a different language here. Are we talking more perennial or more annual type, or just what are we? You know, because bulbs only come up in the spring, and then I know that there's several varieties of annuals that last throughout the year. You know, what type of plants are envisioned, I guess?
I'm going to let Mike start with this one and then hand it over to Steve for items that could actually go in.
Well, as best, I'll do my best. And I think on page 4, the bottom photo, and Steve, correctly if I'm wrong, but that's kind of a combination of perennials and a manicured hedge, and then also some annuals. So I think we're looking at a combination of things that would provide color throughout the year. I think the top picture on page 5 shows a similar situation without the annuals, but after that, that's about the extent of my expertise, and I'll refer it back over to Steve again.
I mean, you guys have all been around. The history since I've been here for the last 8 years, the majority of it is perennials. They come up. We have a lot of hyacinth that come up early spring. We come in, we plant annuals one time a year, and we just kind of spice up the mulch. We have grasses there that are perennials. We don't come back like you might see some of the home association front beds. You know, they come in 3 times a year and take the annuals out, put more annuals in for the type of flower that does best during that time of year. That is what we are talking about, more manicured. I think when you just leave one annual in for the whole year, it does kind of get, as Mike said, a little, looks like it's growing a little wild. A combination of both helps on the time, but it's just, again, if you're looking at, if you want to get away from the grasses, then there's hedges that we can put in there, trim them up, as I like to use, high and tight, and they look a little bit more formal. So that's kind of, we could get away from the grasses, go with the hedges, all trimmed, more annuals, and basically change the look of it 1, 2, 3 times a year.
Thank you, sir. I'm in support of that, and I think we need to go even a little further, probably not at tonight's discussion, but in the future, we want to remember that at our community conversations, one of the big themes was creating or defining a downtown area. And I think this is obviously the most logical choice from a geographic and an infrastructure standpoint. We don't have a main street, we don't have a square. This is our obvious choice for what will be the downtown feel, especially with the completion of the community center behind us. And I think changing out the plants in the spring, the summer, and the fall varieties so that we get a different look each time. It's not staid, it's not stoic, but going to a little bit more of a formal look and investing in that. And I think that's going to go well beyond just City Hall and the municipal building. I think it's going to extend to the municipal circle for a while, because I think this is going to become a destination place. So I think we're on the right track. I think this is a good idea.
Thank you, Mr. Holman, for those comments. You just spurred another thought of mine, too. Is one thing that I heard during the community conversations was a comment that was printed up on the screen is to expand on the garden spot of the state. This plays right into that, I believe. I am a huge supporter of new, fresh looks, throughout the year, and I like what I'm hearing so far. I also like shrubberies, I like bushes and all of that, but also I do know that those can get scraggly looking, even as beautiful as they are in a small space that we're talking about. They can become overcoming. And so, I'm not going to tell you what to plant. You have better experience than I do. But, I'm definitely a supporter of it looking fresh, and I don't want to say new, but fresh and clean and tidy are some of the words I would say.
Thank you. I kind of like the idea of some greenery too. I think boxwoods would be a good choice, but I also kind of like a lot of color. Crocus and daffodil and tulips are the sign of spring coming. Vincas pretty much last all year long. Even if you want some winter color, I think icicle pansies would be a good choice.
I'm going to jump on the bandwagon, and I like the combination of the perennials and annuals, and I might add, you know what you notice a lot of times is like the hanging baskets that have the flowers in, or the flower pots that have it in. Those to me don't seem like they're a lot of maintenance, and they give a big pop when you walk up somewhere, you see it. Not everything is just ground level. You have kind of some different levels of flowers, and those are, you can change out, put the mums in, or other than the big hanging baskets. But I'm kind of a big fan of that. Now, I might add that when I have somebody come out and look at my house, I always ask them, I'm cheap, and I want low maintenance, and I want big pop. And they said none of that goes together. So, so I'm always struggling back and forth. But something that's not going to require a lot of maintenance, but you know, you see it and it grabs you. I'm a big fan of that. So, and the changeover in the season, because like we were talking, when we have those 100-degree days in July. By the time we hit in the fall, some of that stuff is just looking really, really ragged, and it draws your eye kind of away from what we want. You know, we start out strong and kind of end, and it's not as strong as when and we've been having a lot of stuff at the end of the year up here. You know, we had quite a few folks for the Christmas tree lighting, so something that they're going to notice when they come up.
Thank you, sir. Again, back to our community conversations and our survey. This actually touches on a number of other things, aesthetics, maintenance. I mean, just a number of issues that came up out of that conversation. And it's amazing. Steve would certainly understand how crazy I am, but a simple plant placed in the right place can make a building look different. The one that comes to mind, and you'll have to excuse my poor description, but the large plants with the thin stem and the very large orange blooms that you put in the roundabout at the entrance to Recreation Park. You've had them for 2 years. Those really pop and really make that stand. I want to remember that a plant has a life cycle. That's why and what we're interested in generally is the bloom itself. We get some visual aspect from the greenery as well, but that's why I'm kind of in favor of the maybe rotating out the stock on the spring. Steve is familiar with this, the spring, summer, and fall basis. And we can cover most of the year with that and really add a lot to the building. It's almost like, you're going to laugh at me, this paint striper. It really adds a lot to the appearance, and people notice it, I think.
Okay, I went out and looked at the bench, and I would think they had to have been there last week when I thought they weren't there. Is that okay? So what I must have not seen, well, I was looking at the new flagpole, so that was probably a good thing. But I looked for them thinking if I was going to be up here on Tuesday for a long time, I'd want to sit on those benches, and the flowers are in front of them. So I think people would be afraid to use the benches because they're surrounded by flowers right now, and you would have to kill flowers. So that would, I mean, that's the only comment I'm going to have on flowers. Thank you.
One thing my neighbor has told me, and he's a grounds or a landscape designer for Rose Hill, and I'm lucky enough to have him my neighbor. Not only is he a great guy, he is a very talented landscaper, designer. And I have tried to put an annual bed in my front yard, and I've had some success with that, and you've probably seen it, and I'm quite proud of my annual flowers. But one thing that Jason does point out to me is that I don't have anything there grounding it. And I'm like, what do you mean grounded? What he explained to me is that some kind of a hard structure, whether it be some kind of a stone, a decorative stone, maybe moving my fountain to that area to ground that area. Is there been given any thoughts to that? And that's kind of what I'm thinking of, what Joe was talking about, the benches right there being a grounding in that area, but it's very uninviting to sit in that. What's the thoughts on that?
Well, excuse me. I think what you're talking about a little bit is the top picture on page 5. When you got the bench there, and then you have the correct junipers or the correct shrub there trimmed up nice. That's kind of where you're getting your grounding, and you see the picture. We talked a little bit about that, having those benches be our focal point there with the shrubs on the side of them with a little height dropping down and continuing around on the half circle beds. So I think that's kind of where Jason's going with that. And we could definitely look at doing something like that out here.
It sounds to me like across the board, we have pretty much council consensus on this. We like the idea, we'd like to see some stuff. My question would be to Mike and Steve. We've pitched a few things out there, but you're certainly the expert in this, and I trust your decisions impeccably because I've seen what you've done, freeform. Do you need anything else from us as far as ideas or suggestions, or did we cover it?
I think what staff is hearing, if I could speak for Mike and Steve, is you'd like something a little bit more formal, a little bit more manicured look around these, not necessarily rigidly so, with a variation throughout the year. Would that be fairly accurate?
I would say that, but also some color. That's what I'm hearing without actually hearing that word, but that's the sense that I have, is that the color pop there. And I really like what Councilman Barber brought up with the hanging baskets and that. We see that not throughout the city, but in several different high-profile places that have that, and they are absolutely beautiful. And I think that's worthy also of thought.
Mr. Mayor, the Garden Club has done a lot, especially they did a lot around the roundabout. Are you interested in having any input from the Garden Club, Sunset Garden Club? Because I have furnished in the past, we've furnished a lot of supplies, material, and unpaid labor.
Yeah, and it's been very much appreciated. And yeah, I can definitely come to one of the meetings and talk about what we're doing if that's what everyone would like me to do, and just get their opinions. And then, the more opinions we have, the better. So it might be a good thing to do.
It would also be staff's intention to repeat this same application in the 2 teardrop medians that are the entrance exit locations, if that meets the approval of council. The last thing relative to landscaping is the trees. As you all read in there, we unfortunately planted ash trees all the way around the circle, and they will have to be taken out with this new program. Mr. Rulo has indicated that we can apply for a grant to receive some aid in getting rid of those. Right now, we probably wouldn't be making any presentations, at least in the current calendar year, to replace those with anything, especially unless we knew we had the grant or not, so that I could give the council a pretty formalized amount that would be associated with that many trees. If you've looked at them, unfortunately, there are a whole lot of them that are not overly attractive, even as it stands now, before the borer gets to them. I'm sure after that, they would be even worse. There are a number of them that don't have headers. There are a number of them that are like the one on the west side here. If you take a real close look at it, for some reason, it's like a divining rod. It's trying to go over and find water. It's bending so bad. So getting rid of them won't necessarily be the worst thing from an aesthetic standpoint, although we always hate to cut down trees that we don't have to.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did take an opportunity when I stepped outside to take a stroll, and that's what I did. I looked at the trees and saw many of them with borers in them. The trunks are very many of them are deformed and kind of like the Charlie Brown Christmas tree in many cases. What I'm kind of curious about, what would the removal be? Would just cutting them down, removing the stump, or would we need to dig those out? You know, I don't understand what all the ramifications of the borer beetle is, or what are we looking at?
If we apply for the grant, it's through the Missouri Department of Conservation. It's a trim grant, and there's actually a portion on it that is specifically for this EAB, the emerald ash borer disease. It's for being proactive, taking out your ash trees and replanting them. With the amount of trees we have, it's up to a $10,000 grant. So if we could get them spaded out and get new trees planted in their holes, that would be the best scenario. Not quite sure if we have enough money to do that in $10,000. We got quite a few trees here. But that's what we would look at before or during the grant, just to try to figure out. If we went through, just cut them out. Once you cut them down and you chip up the trees, then you know, you don't have to worry about the disease coming through. The borers that you're talking about that are in the trees right now are not, it's not the emerald ash borer that we know of. It's been spotted to the west of us, north of us, east of us, but it's not here yet. So I don't want anybody to get panicked yet. But the emphasis is once you find them, they've been here for 6 years. So the likelihood of them being somewhere is probably pretty good. So being proactive, coming in before they actually start coming out into our city, I think that's a pretty good idea.
In absence of not being able to spade all those trees out, what would the procedure be for replanting? I don't know if we'd be able to replant in the same hole. We'd have to sidestep, or, you know, it sounds like a big undertaking no matter what, but what are we looking at as far as logistically doing that?
Well, what we would probably do is just, you know, the trees right now have been spaced appropriately around. We'd probably just go in the middle of where they're at right now, replant them, take the other ones out, come in with a stump grinder, take the stumps out, and then, you know, fill in with dirt and seed and move on. And we would definitely come in with a diversified species of trees. We wouldn't plant them all the same species, like in case something like this happens again.
I'm completely fine with this and support of it, but this is like saying that KU has a superior athletic program to MU. I have 3 ash trees in my yard. This is the zombie apocalypse cry. I treat mine with Bayer shrub and tree control every year. I've had them for 13 years. They're going to be fine. You can laugh at me when they die and tell me I was wrong, but I'm going to take this side on this one.
Very good. Next item on this particular agenda is talking about the lighting out in front, or redoing the lighting out in front. Mike?
Sure. Well, in addition to that, I did want to talk a little bit about the entrance and kind of the storefront, where we're seeing a lot of rust and corrosion out there. Since occupying this building, there has been chronic leak issues. You know, there was leaks down into the evidence room. There's been leaks with the front foyer and the vestibule area. We are starting to see it manifest in corroding the flashing and the areas in the storefront there. We've we've actually removed some of the sheetrock and looked behind and found that the insulation in the wall is saturated, and part of it we think is due to, you know, just improper construction, lack of flashing where there should have been flashing, lack of caulking, and some other moisture protective measures. So really don't have a solution at this time. We're going to be exploring that, but hopefully be bringing forward something as part of next year's budget and capital improvement plan to address the issues that we're seeing out there. As Jim said, we also want to talk a little bit about lighting. With the additional of the landscaping, we'd like to coordinate that with some lighting improvements out there. You notice during the winter or late in the year, the patio area around the flagpole is very dark, and we are proposing to put some bollard type lighting around there, and then we've provided you some pictures there. Also, looking at putting a couple of bollards in the center sidewalk between the two parking lots, so that we have a completely lit walkway there. Also, updating the flagpole lighting. The lights that are out there actually were never originally interestingly enough, never originally the flagpole lights. They actually were supposed to be turned and light the banner, the stucco banner that says City of Raymore. They only became the flagpole lights after the flagpole was removed from the chimney and brought back down here. Originally, there was a flagpole up on the top of the tower. There was no way to raise and lower the flag. There was no access to it. And also, I think it got damaged in the wind. And so then the flagpole was installed here, and that lighting was then used to utilize that. So our proposal is to update the spotlights that are out there, install bollards, and install flagpole lights similar to what's down at the depot at Hannah Station. We've got a couple of estimates. The total package for all of the lighting, we estimate about $18,000. And we were talking earlier about timing. We would the best thing to do would be do this in advance of the landscaping, because there is some trenching to do for conduit between the lights. There's some boring that needs to be done under the sidewalks. And so we are looking for some direction from council. Do we put something together and package it for this year, or do we roll it all together into next year's capital improvement plan?
And what Mike has said that's just for the lighting. It does not include the work that we would be doing to what he is referring to as the storefront, the rust and all of that, because that is probably going to require somebody outside of our expertise to come in and help us with that. That is for sure next year's budget.
A comment and a question. On top of the 18,000, do we need some additional money for the additional landscaping that you would be doing? Do we have a number on that as well to add with it?
We don't have a number right now, just trying to figure out, if we wanted to go more formal or not. I don't want to throw a number out there.
Guess he'll smack you.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
fair
pretty
enough.
much. But
Just
but I
checking.
mean, we do have money in a budget for the year, so
Okay.
we can use some of that if it comes up also.
Again, this touches on the main themes we heard out of the community conversation: safety, lighting. We talked about, even as a council, in rough discussions about there was lighting of the trails was a big subject that came up, and the talk was about bollard lighting. We know that we've already talked about the downtown area possibly being here. We know we're going to have more visitors with the community center. What a better place to put these in and see how they function and how they look, and then if we decide to maybe put it in a capital improvement program or spend some of our unreserved fund balance in the future for a trail or two at a time, we've got the test pilot project right here in front of us. So I'm fully in support of this, and I think we should try and do it this year, because what's the timeline on the community center opening right now estimated?
April of 2017.
Yeah, I think we're better off to try and get that done in advance of that, in my opinion.
Especially because I kind of came in a little later on this. We've got 3 different discussion topics here tonight, with the landscaping, the front, and the lighting. I agree. I don't want to hold this off. I'd like to go ahead and take a look at it initially, but I think we should at least be a little hesitant in the sense that let's take a look at the actual numbers. Let's get a little more accurate number here before we immediately say let's pull the plug. This might be because there are 3 separate distinct types of projects. There may be part of it that may need to be a next year's CIP plan. So I agree in principle and would like to see us at least try to explore doing it this year. But I'd like to take a look at each of these 3, because especially with the flashing, we're not talking about planting there. That's actually building construction, and that may take a little more nuanced look, and the numbers could fluctuate a lot more.
And I could be wrong, but I think they specifically addressed that and said that would not be part of this. They're just bringing that to our attention, and I think Mr. Crass is intending to basically explore and see what the depth of the problem is. Those numbers that were given to us would just include the lighting, and then we would need to add on some for the landscaping at this point. But that would certainly be a separate project, is my understanding.
And to kind of correspond to this, though, the other thing I'd like us to kind of consider with this, too, is if we're really redoing primarily the front of the building, there's one aspect that hasn't been brought up, and that's just the lighting in general outside of the main, around the flagpole area. I mean, I've walked out there a few nights, and I'm probably the biggest boy here in the room, and even I get a little nervous with how dark, ridiculously dark, the parking areas are. And I know that at some point there may have been lights back there, but if we're going to be running wire and running lights anyway to the middle, let's look at maybe an extra flagpole, or not flagpole, but just a lamppost around, in between the two zones of parking, just to offer a little additional protection there.
And interestingly enough, staff has looked at that. We actually reviewed it one night after dark. Specifically, if you stand at the edge of the front entrance and just draw the lines out to where the lights are now, in essence, until you get to the actual parking stalls themselves, it's not just dark, it's pitch dark. So the lighting price that Mike has estimated here includes two of the same type of bollards that are directional that would actually shine back out into that dark area. Because right now, with these bollards, you would be stepping off of a light point that just includes the circle, but when you hit the asphalt in the very front, it's dark. And so we would be putting two bollards out there in the center to light that area specifically.
Are you talking about poles, or are you talking about at the level of the walking? Because I've seen where some cities have taken the lights, and instead of having overhead where nobody is, they have them down at the foot level where you're walking and where you can actually see what's going on. I've noticed myself in coming down these steps here, you can't tell when they change levels. The only way that when you have a high light, the only way that you can tell when you're changing levels is to put it down there at the level of your feet. So I wanted you to think about that as well. Because as we get older and we're talking about doing things for older folks, where they put their feet is more important than where their head is. So I'm talking about right down in here.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to carry on a conversation with Ms. Schubach, but I will later. Anyway, I understand and I support having staff go back and give this some investigation and come back to us with a little more idea of how much money we're talking about. This might even give them a chance to come up with more ideas than what they have right now. I do remember one conversation that Mrs. Schubach has had here in the past, a couple times in the recent past, where she's brought up the idea as far as holiday Christmas lighting and stuff like that. I'm kind of wondering if something like a decorative feature of the bollards, the picture on page, and I'm sorry, my glasses do not work very well. Maybe that's my eyes. Page 9 of 16. I can see those bollards there being decorative, or standing out and giving some pop, just like what we talked about in the plantings and stuff like that. So that's why I'm in support of staff going and investigating this and seeing if they come up with something that is very, very attractive and palatable for us to consider, instead of us just saying go out and do this right now.
So could you guys go back to the table and give us a package option, including the landscaping and the lights together, and bring it back to us for consideration?
Yeah, what we will do is we'll go to Britton Electric and get an exact cost for the type of bollards that we're talking about here, since the council seems to be leaning towards that. Mm-hmm. And then I will have Mr. Rouleau, based on the council feedback we've received tonight, come up with an estimated cost, or a fairly tight cost for a more formalized group of landscaping for the front. The trees, we will not know, but that's off until after we know whether or not we've gotten a grant. And then we will for sure be putting off the front entrance until 2017 and coming up with a consultant's price. And then based on that, we would be coming back to you all in 2017 with the budget amendment for whatever it's going to take to get rid of that rusting front that we have. Does that kind of sum up what the council's looking for?
Are we also going to look into possibly fixing the leaks that are occurring? Because you're going to have the same issues every year, every 2 years, if we don't fix, the stuff at the top.
No, that would be a part of it.
That would be-
That's one of
yeah.
the reasons we need to get a consultant in
I thought
here.
sure that
Yeah.
would be something you would do, but
Yep.
I've done maintenance with other organizations that they only fix the problem, and every year we kept fixing the problem
No, our,
instead of fixing the roof.
Our buildings and grounds director is an engineer, so he wants to get to the root of those problems first. Anything else on this particular item from the council? Thank you all very much for your direction.
All right, that takes care of City Hall landscaping and lighting. Should we go on to comparable cities?
Thank you. This will just be very brief. As I discussed with the council last Monday night, what you see on the sheet in front of you is the highlighted in blue, green shade cities like Belton and Blue Springs, not Gardner, are currently what we refer to as the Big 13, which is the survey cities that the council agreed to in 2005. The importance of this to staff is to give you a consistent group of cities that we are reporting back to you on, so that there's never the thought, well, if they'd considered this one, or did they cherry pick that one, or we always want to be giving you the exact same group of cities when we do this. A review of those did indicate that we've kind of grown out of some and maybe should not have had some in the group to begin with. So it would be staff's recommendation that we go with for sure, the cities that we see in the green that have 3 X's each in the last 3 columns. You see because those match up a little bit more closely to even the broad demographics that would meet up with Raymore today rather than in 2005. Some other considerations that go with this, we would like to at least be able to include those cities, which means we would be bringing Gardner into the list, Miriam into the list, Prairie Village, and Shawnee into the list. As the metropolitan area continues to expand out beyond us, I can tell the council members that in 2005, the reason some of the Kansas cities were left off was because they were Kansas cities, but they do very closely match compared to some other cities where we're at today. So we would propose using the ones in green, possibly keep Miriam and North Kansas City because they're 2 out of the 3 X's if you wanted to broaden. And then of course, Peculiar, Pleasant Hill, and Harrisonville, only by virtue of the fact that there are other Cass County cities. But for some of the surveys we're doing, especially if they're financial related, how much do you spend on X? What kind of rates do you have for Y? They're really not comparable to us, with the exception of the fact that they're Cass County cities. Now, if you would like, we can keep them on the list, but segregate them and just say, just for your information, but we wouldn't necessarily recommend relying specifically on that number. And we welcome council feedback.
I like the idea of keeping them on the list, as they are Cass County cities, and we are compared to them.
I'm going to agree with the mayor on this, especially with the Cass County ones, primarily because the reservations I have about the additions of the 4 Kansas ones is the economics of those cities are a different makeup, and the relation they have with the county. With the strength that Johnson County has over these counties, that county provides different services that Cass does not provide, Missouri services. I'm not saying it's a complete vegetable to a fruit, but it's definitely an apple to an orange. And so there is some similarities or differences there, especially Shawnee, which has a completely different economic base. Of course, I'd say that of North Kansas City as well. You know, again, I mean, I'm not an expert in this, and I only took a couple of economics classes in school, but so I'm not one to dictate what the top 5 is or whatever, and if staff wants to do this, I do have some slight reservation in those, but I would agree if we accept the Kansas ones to kind of provide some normalization, keep some of the Cass, Missouri ones in there, even though the populations are a little different and maybe not quite the same economic makeup, it would provide some normalization. And I at least throw that out for discussion.
I'm okay with that myself. My question, to me, the oddball group out of the top 13, I'm asking for feedback from staff. North Kansas City really is a considerably different city. They have a fourth of our population. They're an industrial-based society. They're funded by a casino. There's about as different from us as you can get out of that list. I'm not sure, is there value in still keeping them on the list, in your opinion?
Well, we aren't recommending that they be on the list.
Okay.
Oh, we would only recommend the ones in the green shade.
Okay.
And the Cass County cities. That's why we brought those up.
I'm okay with the ones in the green shade and adding the Cass County cities.
I have trouble putting in the Cass County ones for this reason. Raymore is a charter city, Pleasant Hill's a charter city, and so is Belton. The rest of them aren't. But Raymore is lead in population, and in land size, Raymore leads the rest of them. And if we're going to lead, we don't need to fall back on those different smaller cities and see what they're doing, because we're leading, we're not following. And so I would have trouble with Cass County there.
Oh, I was just going to say, I can see having Peculiar and Harrisonville on there because of being in Cass County, but I like the idea of having an asterisk by them, that they're a Cass County city, but they're really not comparable to us, but they are cousins to us. So that's what I'm in favor of.
Thank you, sir. If I recall correctly, please correct me if I'm wrong. We use this list for things other than financial decisions as well, don't we? I know I've asked a lot of times, we're considering a change to an ordinance or a new ordinance. I'll say, well, what are other cities around us doing? We use that same list for those kinds of things, don't we?
Yes.
That's another thing. I think that there's some value in keeping the Cass County cities around here somewhat similar culture, expectations, ethics, mores, et cetera, that kind of thing. I think there's some value to that.
Mr. Fairborn, just for clarification's sake, so you're recommending removing Gardner, Merriam, Prairie Village, and Shawnee?
That's correct. No. We are recommending including them. They have not been included to date. We would recommend all of the cities in the light green.
This on the far right side of the chart?
Right. That match up with all 3 X's, and we would recommend keeping the Cass County cities in, even though they're not in light green, for all of the reasons that have been stated.
Okay.
Just looking for head nods, sir.
I'm seeing nods around the table, thumbs up.
Thank you very much for the direction.
That takes care of comparable cities. On to city tour.
Alls this is this evening is a save the date, and I'll pass these out. Staff has arranged a tour of some successful developments in the area, specifically the two areas that we were wanting to look at are, I have to confess, areas where I go, what does it really mean when we say an industrial park, and what does it really mean when we talk about a luxury development? So staff has arranged for Friday, June 24th, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., a bus tour and lunch for staff and the council to go and visit all of these places. You can see that in some of the locations, we've actually arranged that we'll be meeting with some of the representatives, either of the development or of the city, when we get there. And we thought it would be very interesting for the council to just kind of see exactly what we're talking about when we talk about these types of developments. So again, not really looking for anything other than please save the date if it's at all possible. This is a Friday, as it says on there. It's Friday, June 24th, 9 a.m. to 5. And it looks like it's going to be a very busy day, is the one thing that I pointed out to everybody. We're going to be moving pretty fast through these.
One thing you might consider, at least look into, it might not be something that fits what in the same package as these, but down at the Power and Light District, they've completed Light Tower 1 and continuing on to Light Tower 2, 3, into infinity. They're selling so fast. High-end luxury apartments. I don't know, maybe they don't fit the same bill as these, but it might be worth staff looking into to see if that's one you want to add. Eric Hosmer has an apartment in Light Tower 1, some other notable people, but they are selling so fast, they're keeping the union carpenters very busy, I know that. So might just be one worth looking into.
Thank you, sir. We will take a look at that. That's all we have.
And now on to Raymore Cemetery.
At the work session where this item first came up, staff received direction from the council at the end of a discussion about the possibility of the city taking control of the Raymore Cemetery. We actually did not have, the council did not have any sort of a formal request from the cemetery board. The letter, we made contact with the cemetery board, and Ms. Cody is here tonight. In case you would have any questions, the whole purpose of putting this on the agenda tonight was to present you all with that letter that you had asked for as far as formal representation, and also to ask if in our discussions with Ms. Cody, there is obviously a significant amount of research that needs to be done with this. We would need to be, if the council wanted it, we would need to be bringing you some sort of a pro forma on what it actually means, background on the cemetery as it exists. But before staff begins those steps as far as that type of investigation, we wanted to come to council and ask if you want us to do that. Do you want us to do, with no commitment, obviously, but we don't know anything as far as what this would take on the part of the city. And so we seek staff or council direction to staff on whether or not you want the next step.
Long and short of it, is the council interested in running a cemetery?
It's a pretty good summary, sir.
Okay.
Could we have Ms. Cody come up and answer some questions? And I guess since I'm the one that requested that, I'll go ahead and start. And this is not a deposition or an interrogation. I just actually had a couple open-ended questions here. Hey,
I'm nervous.
don't hold that against me. But I noticed in looking at the first paragraph, it said that taking this over would include selling of spaces. Do you know how many spaces are available, and do you guys regularly, or at least when I say regularly, is there periodic purchases of plots?
Yes. There are, I don't have a separate record of how many spaces I sell per month. My approximation is we have about 2,514 spaces available. We have one entire section that has not been plotted out yet, so that is just a guesstimate from another section. Yes.
Thank you. What all comes with, if I decide to purchase one of those, or an individual decides to purchase one of those? Obviously, I buy the right to bury remains there. Does that include landscaping? Are there ongoing costs that are paid by the people that buy the lot?
There's no ongoing cost. There are $600 per space. I meet with the person out there and show them what's available. They choose, and it's just a done deal. Then we take care of all the maintenance.
Would that include, I know sometimes like headstones will tilt and it's kind of expensive to get those reset. Do you take care of that as well at no charge?
Periodically in the past they have. We haven't done any in a long time.
Okay, thank you.
Is there, has the board looked at any other options besides the city?
Not particular, the entire board. My father's been doing it for over 18 years, and then I've been helping the last 2 years. We've had other individuals who were willing to step in and help, and it was just too much for a volunteer basis. We don't pay, and we don't get paid to do it. But Raymore has grown tremendously, so we feel that it's time.
Well, I guess my question may be a little clearer. If we choose to go down the road to explore taking this over, there's not something parallel going on at the same time. We're the option, or the one you've picked right now.
Correct.
To take over.
There's no one else.
Okay.
Yes.
I assume you do your maintenance by contract or volunteer?
We don't contract it out, but we hire someone to mow it.
Mow and
Yes.
trim, that kind of thing. What's your average annual cost on that, would you estimate?
Oh my gosh. Did I write those down? I didn't write those down.
It's mostly just,
I would guess about 3,000 per season.
okay, and that's just mainly for mowing and trimming?
Yes.
Okay.
We have no other financial obligations besides a cell phone and then the mowing and trimming.
And I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. $3,000 a season, is that done weekly, monthly, or how often is that done for that?
The pay is hourly. The cemetery owns their own mowing equipment, and we pay someone $15 an hour to go in and mow and weed eat.
I guess what I'm asking is, how many times a season is it mowed?
I don't have those numbers, and I should.
And I respect that. This is something that's coming so quickly and so fast that, you know, my expectations are not that high, but I'm just kind of curious, you know, because I sit and I actually sign the checks for the lawn care service for my union hall, and we're paying, I think, right at, last check I signed was about $1,100 a month to mow a wide open field at the Union Hall. So I'm trying to equate a cemetery with a lot of trimming compared to a very open field that is, you know, pretty well cut and dried. And looking at the two different costs is completely different for me to see, so.
It basically depends on how wet it is as to how often it gets mowed. It takes approximately 8 hours to mow the whole thing and 10 hours to weed eat. I think on an average it would probably be mowed weekly unless we've had a dry spell. Then there's been times in August where they'll go 2 or 3 weeks without mowing because it's too dry. Weed eating every other week, I think, generally.
And I believe from our conversation as well, just as a point of clarification, sir, that is weed eating and mowing only. It does not include things like the flowers that have to be removed. You do all of that yourself.
Yes, correct.
So an FTE equivalent to take care of it.
I have one other question, maybe a bit sensitive, but from the way the letter's written, I mean, you've asked us to at least consider or take over the cemetery, turning over all assets to us. I certainly would not be the type of person to say, hey, we now have all this land, we're going to turn it into an amusement park. But I could see that setting off a lot of people on your board after turning this over to us. And you want to remember, this council will not be as it is forever. Have you considered some possible detrimental actions that might cause some emotional problems with your existing board and longstanding members?
No.
I mean, it's not something you want to think about. And again, it's not something I personally would vote for, but once you turn the land over to the city, it would certainly become the city's property. And this council, as I said, will not set forever. Other people might have other interest if that land people felt like it might needed to be used for something else. It might be something that you want to consider before we go too much further into this.
Okay, based on what you've said that you guys do, are there any other additional obligations that would be required to do this? Any other services offered? I mean, basically, we're being asked to go into the business of running a cemetery. So, I mean, is there any obligation if somebody is to be buried there to provide? I mean, obviously, you have to dig. I don't know how to not be just perfectly blunt about this. You got to dig the hole. That costs money. You got to have security out there, supervise it to some degree, at least cemeteries I've been involved with. What are some of the other services that you offer or are needed?
Okay. The only things that we do, we sell the spaces. When a burial needs to occur, we go out, we mark the spaces, we flag it. The funeral homes do all of the digging and everything. We don't do any of that. We aren't even present during the burial. The funeral homes handle all of that. Bill Inlow and his son are the ones that generally, I know there's some others that funeral homes use, but they're the ones that are usually out there. That's it.
Are you aware of any liabilities, or have you had any loss or any damage or anything of that sort
We
that you're aware of?
haven't. We carry insurance, but we have not had any issues.
I'm going to ask, Mr. Rulo had a couple of interesting comments relative to this. For some reason, he knows more about cemeteries than the rest of us, which is kind of frightening. But I'm going to let him make a comment or two. The one that always caught my ear was Mr. Rulo comments that you don't really mow a cemetery like this, you weed eat it. But Steve talking about some of the liabilities from the standpoint of what your researches have shown.
Excuse me. Yes, sir. When I was working up in Liberty, the Parks Department was in control of the cemeteries up there. There was 3 cemeteries. The big part is, yes, I consider that you weed eat a cemetery because, in my opinion, you have to weed eat every headstone in between the headstone and out a certain degree, so when the mowers go through, you do not hit any headstones. There is nothing worse than having a family member that does not live in town and comes to see the burial or the grave of a past one, and the headstone's broke, the headstone's chipped, it's got tire marks on it, whatever. It's not a pretty picture. And with that said, the one liability issue that we had discussed with Mrs. Cody is with the instance of digging the hole, have there ever been a situation where you hit an unmarked grave? They have not ever had that, so that's a good thing. But it gets ugly if that happens. So you do run into that liability issue there. From the books that Ms. Cody showed us, it looks like, definitely need to be upgraded, but they've taken pretty good notes. But just a few things out there. Vandalism, we ran into a stint in Liberty. Like she said, the headstones are very expensive. It's not something staff can do. You have to, basically, when the headstone falls over, you have to put a new footer in, bring it up, you have to caulk it. Those things weigh a ton, and they usually have a little crane on the back of their vehicle. So that's definitely some things to think about. 18 hours, that's quite a few days. Just something to think about.
Staff would ask for direction from the council on step 2, which we would consider to be investigative only.
Well, shall we have the staff investigate? Do you want Raymore to have a cemetery?
Well, no, it was just going to be a response to that, but, for me, I can't reiterate enough, there are a lot of variables here we have to look at before we can make a sound decision on this. And so I would encourage, if it were only investigative in nature, to be able to, one, take a look at the financial statements of the association, explore, we talk about like cities, what other cities do. I just, again, to me, there's a lot to this, and especially when I hear selling of spaces. I have family members that passed away over 100 years ago. They're in cemeteries that are done. They're full. There's just some maintenance to them. But this is the business of adding to. So we're running a business here to some degree. And so I think there's just a whole different nature to that. So before I would support or oppose, I would like to see a lot of information.
How do you take that different from us selling water and sewer services?
Primarily because we're in the business of doing that. We've done that since we started offering that service. We're a municipality. Municipalities do that as a normal, standard operating services for residents. Larger cities, the city of Kansas City has several cemeteries that they oversee. Obviously, the city of Liberty. But this is our first foray into this, and so for me, it's not unheard of, but it is for us. And so I think we just need more information. So I'm not speaking for or against. I just don't know.
Thank you, sir. I'm in support of the initial investigative step to find out a little bit more about it. I would like to confirm one thing with you. I think I'm correct, and this is for your benefit as well. We would, if we took this over, more than likely have to develop a new business model for this business. Would you say that's correct?
Yes, sir.
That, again, longstanding members, people with emotional attachments, very possible the price will go up, could go up because of the need. If we have to put on a full-time staff, depending upon what services and how many hours we run it. These are main things, just things that I want you to be aware of, that this will not be run exactly as it has been in the past if we decide to take it over. So I realize this is a big step for you all. I appreciate the fact that you came to us and that you feel like we're the best successor for you. It's like anybody venturing, as Derek said, venturing into a new business, we need to investigate this thoroughly.
And the reason, under normal circumstances, staff likes to bring council full information. The difference here is there will be cost associated. Under normal circumstances, when one business is asking another place to take over their business, they're doing that background and they're providing the pro forma and they're providing an example business model. In this case, they just don't simply have the wherewithal to do that. So staff will be undertaking the costs even associated with the investigation. We just wanted to make sure that the council was okay with the initial investigation being done at some cost to bring back to the council full information on whether or not to be taking this over. But we will be able to provide you with that full information.
I might add one thing. I agree. I'd like more information, but just like if somebody turns a private road over to us, the expectation, once that becomes city property, seems to go up. And I'm not saying that this hasn't been taken care of, and I'm sure it has. I've driven by and it looks nice, but the expectation will go up if the city does take this over. So staff needs to plug that in as well, because there'll be additional costs on top of that.
Absolutely, sir. In fact, when Mr. Rulo was talking with Mr. Mustine and I about this, and to some degree Mr. Mustine as well, they already started to raise that. They were doing that to me. It was, well, you know, if we were in there, we'd be tweaking this a little bit, and, you know, some of these are chalk markers, and so they were already starting to do that step up. So yes, we're very cognizant of the cost going up.
All righty, so the city will go ahead and start investigating into it and report back to us.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That concludes staff's agenda items.
Okay, is there any other things that need to be brought up this evening?
Staff would just, as soon as the gavel comes down on this meeting, I will be clocking out tonight, and would ask that anyone who has volunteered to work the polls tomorrow, meet me at the time clock after I've clocked out, so I can share some materials and information with you. Thank you.
I have a question. Will you be taking one hat off and putting another on, or should we assume that?
You can assume that, sir. I'll be putting on my momentarily volunteer hat.
Okay, if there are no other items tonight, we're in adjournment. Thank you, everyone.